Hello everyone, welcome to my book channel. I'm Zhen Lu and today I'm finally doing the mid-year book freakout tag. So this tag is a list of 14 questions where we look at some of our favorite reads so far, biggest disappointments, favorite characters, and maybe some sequels and new releases that we're looking forward to in the rest of the year as well. So this is just another great opportunity to review our reading year so far, reflect on our goals, and just to bring you some more book recommendations. Let's jump into the questions. The first question is best book you've read so far. So this is kind of also the hardest question for me to answer on this list. I just did my best books of the year so far video and I agonized for so long just to narrow it down to 13 books, and now to choose one from the list is just so much more difficult. I think I managed to narrow it down to the top 3, and they are Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, and Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-Hye Kim. So these 3 books are so different. They're of different genres and they're just all unique in its own way. But if I am really going to make myself pick only one, I think it has to be Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-Hye Kim. This story begins in the 1910s in Korea, so before the Korean peninsula was divided into North and South, and the whole Joseon was occupied by Japan. And it follows several main characters and their lives become just intricately intertwined throughout the rest of the story, and it's set against such a complex historical background of Korea resisting Japanese rule and then just kind of being swept into the Second World War and then divided into North and South. And people that used to be friends and neighbors are now divided by just an intraversible barrier. And people that used to fight on the same side against Japanese rule are now kind of persecuting each other because of their political alignment. This story really makes you feel like the characters are connected by fate, and the cause and effect in their life has this cosmic force behind it that's beyond human comprehension, and everything that happens will have this ripple effect throughout the story and have this unexpected consequence later on in the story. And I think this story really stands out for portraying human beings in such a complex way where people can love very deeply and have very enduring friendship, but also be limited by self-interest. And because of that, they don't always find happiness in the end. I mean, obviously I enjoyed every book that made it onto my best book so far list, but I think if you were to ask me which book would I want to reread as soon as possible, I think it's this one. So the second question is the best sequel you've read so far. So I actually haven't read a sequel yet, but I've bought one, and that is A Drop of Corruption. And this is the sequel to The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I really enjoyed The Tainted Cup. So this is a fantasy murder mystery where a biologically enhanced detective was kind of investigating a murder that happened in a grand manner, and a tree grew out of the body. So it's got a very unique premise, and I love the twists and turns in the plot. I love the characterization. I think both Denise Cole and Anna de Labra are very unique in their own way, and they're very memorable characters, and their personality really shine through in the story. So I'm very looking forward to reading this sequel. So I initially borrowed this book from Libby, and I listened to the audiobook for free, and as soon as I finished, I knew I wanted a physical copy in my collection. So yeah, that's how much I enjoyed this book. So yeah, I haven't read it yet, and actually this is the only sequel that I've bought so far in 2025. But I have high expectations for this book. It's supposed to be a locked room mystery, and I feel like those are always just very cleverly written and really fun to like follow along and try to figure out who done it and all of that. So I think this is going to be added to my August TBR, and definitely looking forward to this one. The third question is new release you haven't read yet but want to. I think that is The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. So that book has been on my wish list ever since I heard about its release. So I've read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and this was one of my favorite books of the year so far. I don't think I've ever read a book quite like this before that's written in such a poetic style. I feel like the story and the writing is both real and surreal at the same time. Like you can picture the author's mother buying oxtail at the store but doesn't really know how to say it in English, him getting bullied for riding a pink bicycle, or like his experience with Trevor, who was his first love, and just discovering things about himself and all of the very painful lessons that he's learned in life. You feel like you can kind of experience those scenes. They're written in such a realistic way, but then the author would like seamlessly extrapolate these very philosophical conclusions from everything that happened in his life, and all of it reads like poetry. I feel like you have to experience this writing for yourself, and I'm probably just gonna finally pull the trigger and buy the Emperor of Gladness book for August. Out of the other new releases that I've heard of, I'll probably end up checking out Ian McEwan's new book, What We Can Know. I think it's a science fiction. So he's more known for writing literary fiction. He's the author of Atonement. You may have heard of that. That was also adapted into a film. And earlier this year, I read Saturday, which I did not love the story, but I really enjoyed the writing. So if the same author but a different story, I think could be very interesting. The other new release, probably Catabasis or Catabasis. I don't know how to say that word, but it's a new book by R.F. Kuang. From what I've heard, it's kind of a dark academia fantasy type of book. It's two students, I think, going down to hell to save the soul of their academic advisor, something like that. Out of R.F. Kuang's book, I feel like Babel is probably my favorite, and that one is a dark academia fantasy type of themes. So maybe that's the type of writing by her that I would enjoy the most. Although I am leaning towards borrowing that book when it becomes available on Libby, or maybe using my like Spotify audiobook hours on it when there's an audiobook available. But I think The Emperor of Gladness is on top of my list currently. Question 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. Now this is very easy, and that is the sequel to Blood of the Old Kings, which is called Blood for the Undying Throne. I have been looking forward to that book ever since I finished this one. So this is a epic fantasy set in an empire that's divided into individual kingdoms, and this empire uses the dead bodies of sorcerers as power generators to like power war machines and suppress the people. And this book follows three main characters, Lauren, Kane, and Ariane, and I loved every single one of them. I really love the world building that the author has set up for this series. There's a seven-eyed dragon, and there's a magical sword, and there are powered war machines, there's sorcery, and there's uprising against an oppressive empire. I feel like this book has everything that I'm looking for in a fantasy story. And all of the main characters have had an amazing arc in this story, and I feel like they all grew into a better version of themselves. So I'm definitely looking forward to book 2 to see how their story continues. The next question is biggest disappointment. So I've had a few disappointments this year. I'm not sure which one is the biggest. Just thinking back to, I think, March when I read The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. That book was like over 700 pages long. It just felt really bloated, and I didn't really feel like the plot made a lot of sense. And I didn't find the character particularly likable either. And also it's so long. And after I read it, I didn't really feel like the resolution or the conclusion was that worth it. Following that, I didn't really love The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. That book is like kind of a story in story. It's two sisters in World War era Canada, and there's like a science fiction contained within it. I feel like I just wasn't really sure why the story in story was included. I didn't really see what the message was there, and also just in terms of all of the social issues that the author is trying to talk about, I feel like the main characters were rather isolated or like sheltered from those issues. And the two main characters are like, they were born in a rich prominent family and then married into another rich prominent family. So then when the author was trying to bring up issues of like how the war impacted people and the Great Depression and like class polarization issues and communism them. I just feel like these two characters are completely sheltered from all of these issues, and it felt a little bit hollow. After that, I think more recent disappointments are Hum and The Deep Sky, which were two sci-fi stories that I read in June. Hum was like, it was supposed to be this very robotic world, and Hum is this type of robot that has kind of taken over the world. But honestly, reading that book, I just felt like I was just babysitting a bunch of kids, because it was like the main character has 4 children, and then she takes them to a botanical garden, and the things that happen there would kind of illuminate this issue of how much we rely on technology and how much we should really trust it. But the book is just so focused on her interaction with the kids, and the kids are very young and they're not very cognitively sophisticated, so you're just constantly hearing these very simple things that are spoken to children, like where their shoes are, and like just, yeah, and the reading experience just felt like I was babysitting these kids instead of experiencing a dark robotic future that was promised by the title. And The Deep Sky was like a group of elite, like hand-picked representatives of different nations that go on a space expedition towards planet X to kind of find a new home for humanity. And I think the premise had a lot of promise in terms of just like talking about the political divide between different nations, and how the economic power of different nations and their contribution to this expedition end up really impacting the power dynamic on the ship. I feel like that aspect was really interesting. But then the actual dynamic, the actual dialogue between the characters ended up being just really passive aggressive. And I feel like at points it even verges on catfighting. It's just, these women really don't like each other. And I just feel like when you tell me that these are like elite hand-picked members, that you only have like 1 or 2 from each nation, they're like the best of the best from different countries around the world, I was expecting them to be like charming and diplomatic and professional and just being able to like work together and solve a problem. But it just feel like it was mostly infighting that was the main dynamic in that book, and I just really didn't enjoy it. And a few of my July reads have turned out to be quite disappointing as well. I will talk about them in my July reading wrap-up. One of them is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I feel like the author was setting up a premise to talk about, grief and personal demons and like psychological divide between family members and how they can kind of better themselves and find reconciliation. I just felt like the characters were really unlikable, and the dialogues were very awkward and sometimes like going in circles. And the author was like insisting on just writing intimacy scenes with so much detail that I just did not feel like it was necessary. I don't feel like I'm particularly prudish about intimacy scenes, but in certain instances, I feel like she's just like prolonging them to, I don't know, just sell more books, I don't know. I feel like it's really throwing off the narrative balance. I feel like the characters were not really likable, especially Peter. He's very like hypocritical. He's like a guy in his mid-30s dating a 23-year-old OnlyFans model, and he judges his brother for dating an older woman. And in terms of how all of the relationships resolved in the end, I feel like it's both predictable and unsatisfying. And yeah, just after reading that book, I just didn't feel like I gained anything. And I have read 4 out of the 6 Hugo Best Novel finalists for 2025. 3 of them ended up being quite disappointing. So like the only Hugo book I liked so far was The Tainted Cup. A Sorceress Comes to Call was just kind of like a gold digger with mind control powers that's like terrifying her child. Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky was the first Adrian Tchaikovsky book that I've ever read, and it ended up being a huge disappointment because the vast majority of the story takes place between robots, and they all speak in a very predictably robotic kind of way. So like all of the dialogue is just them not understanding context, not being able to interpret the intention of anyone, and just it's kind of like if you make a phone call and there's like an automatic response system. It's like several automatic response systems talking to each other. That's how boring and dry that dialogue was. And The Ministry of Time by Callie M. Bradley claims to be a sci-fi romance. But basically, the British government has this special ministry where they have pulled people from the past through a time door, and that is the only sci-fi element in the story. It's just like these people have time traveled and they're here. There's nothing else that really engages with science or experimentation or research or technology or anything. And the female protagonist specializes in Southeast Asian languages, and because of that, she was given top-level clearance, and she was serving as a bridge to someone who was born in the 1810s, and he was part of Franklin's lost expedition. So I don't know how speaking Southeast Asian languages qualifies her to communicate with a 19th century naval officer who obviously speaks English. And anyway, they ended up being roommates and just becoming more than that. But I feel like just all of the flirtation and the romance scenes are so awkward, and they're honestly like physically cringy at certain points. And this book was like nominated for several awards. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize as well, and it is not nearly on the same level with my other Women's Prize reads from this year. And I have no idea why it would be put into the same category as like sci-fi fantasy books. I feel like if it were to compete with anything, it should just compete with other romance books, and it probably would lose to even that. So yeah, I feel like I've already spent too long on this question, and it's made it seem like my reading year has a lot of disappointments, but actually the vast majority of books that I've read this year I've enjoyed. It's just I blame the Hugo. I feel like the Hugo nominees are just of quite uneven quality this year. I have 2 more to go. Once I finish Alien Clay and Someone You Can Build a Nest In, I will make a Hugo book review video, and then you can see all of the details of my Hugo reads. Question 6 is biggest surprise. I think that is Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami. So this is one of my International Booker Prize reads of 2025, and this book, just in terms of its uniqueness and in terms of the sweeping scale of the plot and how it really like transcends space and time, it was quite surprising, and I have never read anything quite like it. So this story is set in the distant future where human society has fundamentally changed, and you're seeing like different protagonists telling this story from the first person perspective. So it's told in the voice of I, but then you have to figure out like what these groups are and how they are connected with each other and what kind of a full picture that they paint of the Earth in the future. And once all of these puzzle pieces come together, it was like such a great eureka moment that I feel like I wish I could have read this book for the first time and just like gone through that discovery process again. It was such an interesting and surprising experience, and it's definitely made me interested to read more from this author, Hiromi Kawakami. Question 7 is favorite new author, debut or new to you? I feel like I have to give this one to Gustave Flaubert, who is new to me, but definitely not a new author. This is a classic, and rightfully so. This is one of the most poetic, beautiful, dreamy writing that I have ever read. And this story is just so touching, and I feel like it goes so far beyond Madame Bovary and her marriage and her dissatisfaction with her marriage. It's about feeling trapped in your life and just dreaming of freedom and dreaming of something bigger and better, and how universal that desire is and how much freedom is contained in those dreams and those reverie. And I have to point out the translator, Lydia Davis. So this translation is widely agreed as the best translation that this work has ever received. And her translation is very straightforward, but also very elegant, and I think it really preserved the poetry of the original French. So I definitely recommend that you pick up Madame Bovary, and specifically I would recommend that you pick up the Lydia Davis translation. Question 8 is newest fictional crush. I think that is probably Tamil from Blood Over Brighthaven. I think Tamil is just very brave and very capable, but he also has this great capacity to learn. So from like working with Siona, everything that she had taught him, despite the language barrier, he had just very easily picked up. And he's very passionate in protecting the people that he loves, but also I feel like he stands very firm in his principles, and he's capable of making very, very hard decisions, particularly near the end of the story. He made a great sacrifice. If you read the story, you probably remember that moment. It's one of the things that really made me cry in this story. But yeah, I feel like he's just a very admirable and very special person. And he's charming and he has a great sense of humor. So yeah, he has all the trappings of a great fictional crush. Question 9 is newest favorite character. I think that's probably White Fang by Jack London. So White Fang is a wolf dog that is the protagonist of this story. And he was born in a very brutal environment with very scarce resources. So he had to quite literally fight for the right to survive. He was bullied by other dogs because he was a wolf dog mix and he's different from everybody else. And he had to fight other animals for just things to eat and just resources to survive. And later he had different human masters and he had very different experiences with them, and he learned what brutality looks like and what love looks like, and he kind of grew and changed with his environment and with his changing masters. So White Fang is a wolf dog, but he felt like a very complex and very real human character. Whenever he's in a situation where he is hurt by the treatment of others or just by physical violence, you'll feel hurt with it as well. And later when he was taken in by like a very loving and very caring master, he just like transformed into this very loyal, fiercely loyal companion that's willing to just go to extreme lengths to protect his family. So overall, very, very lovable character. And I feel like there are many, many life lessons that you can learn from watching the progression and the hero's journey of White Fang. Question 10 is book that made you cry. Oh boy, I have quite a few this year. So I read some very touching, very tear-jerking kind of stories. The first book I think that made me cry this year was Blood Over Brighthaven, particularly the ending. It's like you followed these characters along, you spent so much time with them throughout the progression of this entire story, and then just like seeing that moment of sacrifice in the end. And I can't say too much because it would spoil the story, but yeah, I cried several times even after like finishing the story, just thinking back at it. So yeah, I cried I think throughout the last 2 or 3 chapters of the book, and then just during the week after finishing this book, whenever I think back at the story, I would cry again. This story was very powerful. And the next book that really, really made me cry this year was Ama by Sarai de Silva. So this was one of my Women's Prize reads. This story follows a family and their immigration journey. So it actually started from the beginning of the grandmother's life in Singapore, actually. And then the family moved to Colombo in Sri Lanka, and then later to New Zealand, and then later to the UK. So this story has both like very deep misunderstanding and fissure between family members, and also like understanding and reconciliation, and then just later uniting around their love for their grandmother. There are a lot of heavier subjects in this book, like growing up in a very alienating kind of environment and how that affects a person's development, and how that affects how they conceptualize the way that other people treat them, and how that affects the choices that they make. And just like latching on to the smallest gesture of kindness and love because that's been absent previously from their lives, and how like very deep resentment could form between people, but then ultimately they still have the capacity to forgive and reconciliate with their family members. It's a very beautiful book, and I definitely recommend that you check it out. Another book that very recently made me cry was The Safe Keep by Jill van der Uden. So this was a surprise read for July. I was originally did not plan for this one in my TBR, but then it won the Women's Prize, and then I reread the synopsis and decided to pick it up. So this story was set in post-war Netherlands in the 1960s, and the main character is called Isabel, and she lives in the house that her mother left behind after she passed away. But legally speaking, the house is actually her brother's, and her brother decided to let his girlfriend Eva stay in the house. And Isabel and Eva initially kind of really clashed and did not like each other. But then at the end of at the end of part 1, there was this dramatic change in their relationship. Like the entire dynamic between them just shifted shifted. I can't give too much away. There's a lot of really well done dramatic tension throughout this book, and you feel like in every look that the character exchanged, there's this like charged energy, and it was very exciting. And then in part 3, this book really became larger than both of the characters. It became kind of larger than life, and it really reflects on things that happened during World War II and how people were treated and how easy it was to turn a blind eye and just be complicit to a lie about the new normal or the new reality when it benefits the personal interest of a lot of people. It's a really tense story, and then it became a really complex story. And I think I cried throughout the entirety of part 3, and I really can't give too much away because it's a huge plot twist. And all of the heavier issues that I just talked about regarding World War II and the treatment of people, it hits harder when it's talked about from a first-person perspective, and that's all that I can tell you. But like, it's in the form of a diary, and once you read this book, you will find out, and you'll probably cry as well. Question 11 is book that made you happy. I just realized I didn't read a lot of happy books this year. I kind of picked a lot of like dark and heavy subjects and like very dramatic, twisty kind of narratives. But I think if I were to pick one that's more cozy and heartwarming, it's probably Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. So this is the story of Adina, who is in fact an alien, but she actually was born to a human mother. So then she grew up in a human family, and she discovered a scanner with which she could communicate with her extraterrestrial superiors. And she just started observing human life and reporting on human life to her alien supervisors. And I think this book has a lot of unique observations and insights on things that we take for granted in life, and just how to deal with that feeling of being a misfit, almost feeling like an alien in certain situations. And it really makes you just take a moment and think about how we treat each other in certain situations and why. There's just something about this book that feels both a little bit innocent, but also like very insightful and just unique. This is another book that I listened to for free on Libby, and then immediately decided that I need a physical copy in my collection, and then I paid for it. So although I wouldn't say that this is like simply a happy book, it's more bittersweet, especially the ending, but I definitely do feel like it's a cozy read. And after you finish reading and put the book down and like think back at certain moments, there are things that just make you smile and make you happy. Question 12 is most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. I have several candidates for this one. I feel like Beasts of a Little Land that I just talked about. This is a really gorgeous art on the cover. And this tiger is highly symbolic to the story as well. And the tiger is kind of a thread throughout this story, if that makes sense. And also Amma that I just mentioned, what a gorgeous cover that is. Like, I feel like it looks a lot better in person, just like the symmetry and just these beautiful colors blended together. And also this tree is like a central symbol of family and love and union in this story as well. And another two, I feel like that the cover designs are particularly beautiful. I would say Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. Unfortunately, this is a DNF for me, and I will talk about why in my July reading wrap up. I just feel like there is kind of a mismatch between the type of story this is and the type of reader it's trying to reach versus who I am as a reader. So this is not really what I'm looking for. But just in terms of the like elegance of this design and how well it fits the plot and the mood and the theme of this story, this is a fantastic cover. And another one I think is They Bloom at Night by Tran Tang Tran. It's a fantastic depiction of something that's under the water, and I feel like you really see how the light interacts with the water and how that like casts different shadows and change the colors. Yeah, I really think this is a really beautiful piece of art. And also the water droplets are like slightly shinier and the rest of the cover is matte. So this is really interesting texture design as well. So yeah, those are some of the most beautiful book covers that I've seen so far. Question 13 is what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So I already mentioned A Drop of Corruption, which is the sequel to The Tainted Cup. I would definitely want to read that before the end of the year. And I picked up The City in Glass by Ni Vo. So this author had already won the Hugo, and this book was shortlisted for for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize. That is a book prize that I talked about in my book award updates video. So this is a somewhat new prize. I think it just started in 2022, if I remember correctly, and it acknowledges authors that write about themes that are reflected in Ursula K. Le Guin's writing. Themes like equity and hope and human nature and many others. And I feel like it's kind of a prize that's designed for Ursula K. Le Guin fans, and it just looks for more stories that give you that impression and that mood. So yeah, this would be the first title on that shortlist that I will be reading. I'll probably end up picking up more from that list. Aside from that, I also have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book is just like so well known. I feel like this is one of those must-read titles. And also I read Clara in the Sun earlier this year. That was my first Ishiguro read. I feel like that story was not one of my favorites, although there are elements of the story that I really enjoyed. Particularly, I really liked Clara as a character, and I was definitely interested in reading more from this author. I also have Remains of the Day on my shelf, but just in terms of the synopsis, I feel like this one is a lot more interesting. This is one of the ultimate like dark academia reads, so I feel like, yeah, definitely probably for September this would be a good option. And I've bought quite a few translated fiction this year, especially like translated science fiction, and I think out of those, the one that I want to read first is Waste Tide by Chen Qiufan. So this is a Chinese science fiction novel that was translated by Ken Liu, who was the translator for The Three-Body Problem, and he also wrote the Dandelion Dynasty series. That series I will probably read at some point in the future. So this story is set in a fictional place called Silicon Isle. So this is where a lot of like electronic waste is discarded, and it follows the lives of the workers that work at this place, and they deal with just like electronic waste and discarded laptops and cell phones and technology and all of that. And there's a lot of like deeper socioeconomic commentary and like a complex political background, and gang violence I think is in here as well. So yeah, this is definitely something that's very intriguing to me, and I would like to read this book soon. And the last question, favorite book community member. So I watch a lot of booktubers, and it's really difficult for me to pick a favorite. So I would just list a few off the top of my head. Let me look at my YouTube watch history. I watch Willow Talks Books quite a lot. So she's a great source for like especially Japanese fiction. She reads a lot of Japanese fiction, and I always find interesting recs from her channel. And also she likes fictions that have like darker themes and more like dramatic tension and like just unexpected twists, and also she's like very timely on covering and commentating on a lot of the controversies that's happening in the publishing world. And I feel like she always has a really good balanced take on these issues. Another booktuber that I actually recently started watching is Shelly Swearingen. I feel like she just has like a great energy, a great mannerism, and she's like just really chill to watch, and her videos are like very comforting to watch. Although I just discovered I have like pretty much the exact opposite opinion about Middlemarch that she does. I did not like that book, but that one is like one of her favorites. But it just goes to show, even like some of your favorite reviewers like still have fundamentally different opinions as you are, and that's what makes them fun to watch. And also I really like Gunpowder Plot and Fiction's channel. I feel like he is just like very refreshingly honest, and he never pulls any punches on the books that he does not like, and I feel like I really appreciate that, because sometimes you can feel like I do wonder if people talk certain books up because they hear everybody else talk them up. And I feel like with Scott's channel, you would just never have to worry about that. He's always going to be super honest about what he feels about the books. Oh, and I also watched The Shades of Orange. I think she's based in Canada, and she mainly covers like dark fiction and sci-fi. So if those are your jam, that's definitely the channel to go to. And I also really enjoy watching Anna Wallace Johnson. I feel like she's really good at presenting suggesting some of the more like niche books. I feel like whenever I watch her, I always hear about books that I never hear about from other channels. And she has this great sense of like stage presence. I wonder if she's actually an actor, but I feel like she just has this like charisma and humor that's really nice to watch. And she's very fashionable as well. So yeah, those are just like off the top of my head a few of my favorite booktubers. I'll probably end up linking more channels in the description when I think of them. It's just, this is a really big community and there's a lot to discover, and they're just like great creators working in this space. And I would love to hear about your favorite booktubers in the comments below as well. So that was the mid-year book freakout tag. We have some favorite books and quite a few disappointments there, and also some great fictional characters to crush on and some new releases to look forward to. So please let me know in the comments below what you thought of my answers to these questions. What are your answers to these questions? And I would definitely love to hear about what are some of the new releases that you are looking forward to, and some of the books that you are recommending that everyone check out as well. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.